What would you do if your 6-year-old daughter found a note under the dinner table that could have saved both your lives? A note that revealed someone in your own family was trying to poison you at a wedding reception. And what if that someone turned out to be your late husband's mother plotting to steal your child's inheritance by putting you in the hospital? Or worse, this is the story of how a simple treasure hunt uncovered a murder plot that destroyed everything I thought I knew about family. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everything looks perfect on the surface, but something deep in your gut tells you that danger is lurking just beneath the polished exterior. That's exactly how I felt as I stepped through the massive oak doors of Seaview Chateau on what should have been one of the happiest days of our family's life. My name is Olivia Harper, and 3 years ago, my world completely shattered when my husband David died in a car accident, leaving me to raise our 6-year-old daughter Mia all by myself. But today wasn't about my grief or the struggles of single motherhood. Today was about celebrating my sister Ava's wedding to the man of her dreams, Mark Richardson. As Mia and I walked into that grand ballroom, I couldn't help but catch my breath. The place was absolutely stunning. Towering floral arches filled with white roses, and baby's breath created a pathway that seemed to lead straight into a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floor, and guests in their finest attire mingled around cocktail tables draped in ivory silk. Mia looked absolutely adorable in her navy blue dress that matched mine perfectly. She had insisted on wearing the pearl hair bow that David had bought her for her 4th birthday, the last gift he ever gave her. As we made our way through the crowd, she kept fidgeting with it, trying to make sure it was positioned just right. "Mommy, am I too fancy?" she whispered, her small hand gripping mine tightly as she took in all the elegance around us. I knelt down to her level, smoothing out an imaginary wrinkle in her dress. "You're perfect, sweetheart, just like your father would have wanted." Her face lit up with that beautiful smile that reminded me so much of David. For a moment, the weight I'd been carrying for 3 years seemed to lift just a little. Maybe today really could be about joy and new beginnings. But as we continued deeper into the ballroom, I spotted her. Grandma Evelyn, my late husband's mother, sitting at what appeared to be the family table, her sharp gray eyes already locked onto Mia and me like a predator studying its prey. She was impeccably dressed, as always in a burgundy suit that probably cost more than I made in a month from my remote graphic design work. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and she wore those pearl earrings that she claimed were family heirlooms, though I'd always suspected she bought them at Nordstrom. The thing about Evelyn Harper is that she's never forgiven me for what she calls taking her son away from his true potential. According to her, David could have been a successful corporate lawyer if he hadn't fallen in love with me, a struggling artist who convinced him to pursue his passion for photography instead. Never mind that David was the happiest I'd ever seen him when he was behind a camera capturing the beauty he saw in everyday moments. After David died, Evelyn made it clear that she believed Mia would be better off with her, someone who could provide the kind of stability and opportunities that I, as a single mother, working from home, simply couldn't offer. She'd made several not-so-subtle comments about my parenting over the past 3 years, always disguised as concern, but delivered with the surgical precision of someone who knew exactly where to cut to cause the most damage. "There's Auntie Ava," Mia suddenly squealed, breaking me out of my thoughts as she spotted my sister across the room. Ava was glowing in a way that only brides seem to glow, her champagne-colored bridesmaid dress, fitting her perfectly as she chatted with some cousins I hadn't seen in years. When she saw us approaching, her face broke into the biggest smile I'd seen from her in months. "Oh my God, you two look absolutely gorgeous!" she exclaimed, pulling both Mia and me into a tight hug that smelled like her favorite vanilla perfume and hairspray. Ava and I have always been close despite the 4-year age gap between us. When our parents died in a boating accident 7 years ago, she became more than just my sister. She became my anchor, my confidant, and sometimes my only connection to sanity during the darkest days after David's death. I can't believe you're actually getting married, I whispered in her ear as we embraced. It feels like just yesterday you were telling me Mark was just some guy you met at that coffee shop. She laughed the sound light and musical. Look at me now, about to become Mrs. Richardson. Can you believe it? But as we pulled apart, I caught something in her eyes, just for a split second, that looked almost like worry. Before I could ask her about it, Mark appeared at her side looking handsome in his black tuxedo with a white rose boutonniere. Olivia, I'm so glad you could make it, he said, giving me a warm hug. And look at this little princess. Mark had always been great with Mia. From the moment Ava introduced them 2 years ago, he'd treated my daughter like she was his own niece, always remembering her birthday, bringing her small gifts when he visited, and listening patiently to her endless stories about school and her stuffed animals. Uncle Mark, do you like my bow? Mia asked, touching the pearl accessory self-consciously. I think it's the most beautiful bow I've ever seen, he replied seriously, as if he were discussing matters of great importance. It makes you look like a real princess. Mia beamed with pride, and I felt a wave of gratitude toward this man who was about to become my brother-in-law. In a world where Mia had lost her father so young, Mark's kindness meant everything. The ceremony starts in about 30 minutes, Ava said, checking her delicate gold watch. I should probably go touch up my makeup and make sure everything's ready. As she walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just pre-wedding jitters, but there had been something in her voice, a tension that seemed out of place for someone who should be experiencing the happiest day of her life. Mommy, can we sit down? My feet hurt, Mia said, tugging on my hand. I looked around for our assigned seats and spotted our place cards at a round table near the front, close enough to have a perfect view of the ceremony, but far enough away to avoid being in any of the official wedding photos. As we made our way over, I noticed that Grandma Evelyn was seated at the table directly next to ours, close enough to hear every conversation, but positioned in a way that felt deliberately strategic. Hello, Olivia, Mia, Evelyn said as we passed her table, her voice carrying that peculiar combination of politeness and ice that she'd perfected over the years. Hello, Grandma Evelyn, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I'd learned long ago that engaging with her criticism only led to longer, more painful conversations. Mia, come give your grandmother a hug, Evelyn commanded, and I watched as my daughter obediently walked over to her, though I could see the slight hesitation in her steps. Evelyn embraced Mia with what appeared to be genuine affection, but I noticed how her eyes remained fixed on me over my daughter's shoulder, calculating and cold. You look lovely, dear, she said to Mia, then looked directly at me. Though I do hope you're not getting too much sun. A child your age needs to be careful about her complexion. It was such a small comment, seemingly innocent, but I knew it was actually a criticism of my parenting. According to Evelyn, I was too permissive, too careless with Mia's well-being, too everything that a proper guardian shouldn't be. She uses sunscreen, I said simply, not taking the bait. Of course she does, Evelyn replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I just worry, about both of you. Living in that small apartment, working those irregular hours, it must be so difficult managing everything on your own. There it was, the reminder that I was struggling, that I was inadequate, that maybe, just maybe, there was a better solution for everyone involved. We're doing just fine, I said, reaching for Mia's hand. Come on, sweetheart, let's get to our table. As we walked away, I could feel Evelyn's gaze boring into my back like a physical weight. Something about the way she'd been looking at Mia bothered me more than usual. There had been an intensity there that felt different from her typical disapproval, more focused somehow, more purposeful. Our table was lovely, decorated with small arrangements of white roses and greenery with elegant place settings that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. Mia immediately began examining everything with the curiosity of a 6-year-old touching the crystal glasses carefully. and marveling at how the silverware caught the light. "Mommy, this is like a princess party," she whispered, and I couldn't help but smile at her wonder. "It really is, isn't it?" I agreed, trying to push away my concerns about Evelyn and focus on the beauty of the moment. Other guests began filtering toward their seats as the ceremony time approached. I recognized some faces from previous family gatherings: David's cousins, Ava's college friends, a few neighbors from our childhood home. Everyone looked happy and excited, chatting quietly as they waited for the festivities to begin. But as I looked around the room, taking in all the careful details and obvious expense that had gone into making this day perfect, I couldn't help but think about how different my own wedding had been. David and I had gotten married in a small ceremony at the local park with maybe 30 guests, and a reception in my parents' backyard. It had been simple, intimate, and absolutely perfect because it had been ours. This wedding was beautiful, but it was also a production. Everything was designed to impress, to create an image of success and happiness that would look perfect in photographs and social media posts. I found myself wondering if Ava was truly happy or if she was just playing the role that everyone expected her to play. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The ceremony will begin in just a few moments," announced a wedding coordinator with a clipboard and a headset, her voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced authority. As guests settled into their chairs and the buzz of conversation began to quiet, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. It wasn't about the wedding itself. I was genuinely happy for Ava and Mark. It was about being here in this room surrounded by people who knew about my struggles, my failures, my inability to provide the kind of life for Mia that everyone thought she deserved. "Mommy, are you okay?" Mia asked, her small hand finding mine under the table. I squeezed her fingers gently and gave her my best reassuring smile. "I'm perfect, baby. Just excited to watch Aunt Ava get married." But as the lights dimmed slightly and the wedding music began to play, I caught sight of Grandma Evelyn one more time. She was whispering something to a man I didn't recognize, someone in a server's uniform who nodded seriously before disappearing toward the kitchen. The interaction lasted maybe 10 seconds, but something about it sent a chill down my spine. There had been something secretive about the exchange, something that felt out of place at a wedding celebration. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of being around David's family was making me see threats that didn't exist. After all, what could possibly go wrong at a wedding? We were here to celebrate love and new beginnings surrounded by family and friends in one of the most beautiful venues I'd ever seen. As the first notes of the processional music filled the air and the wedding party began their walk down the aisle, I pushed my concerns aside and focused on the joy of the moment. Whatever was bothering me could wait. Today was about Ava's happiness, and I was determined not to let my own anxieties overshadow her special day. But deep down in that place where mothers develop an instinct for danger that can't be explained or rationalized away, I knew that something was wrong. And as the ceremony began and everyone's attention turned toward the bride and groom, I found myself glancing back at Grandma Evelyn one more time, wondering what secret she was keeping and why she seemed so particularly interested in making sure everything went according to her plan. The music swelled, and suddenly the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The bridesmaids began their procession first, each one more beautiful than the last, carrying bouquets of white roses tied with champagne-colored ribbons that perfectly matched their dresses. But when the bridal march began, when those first magical notes of Canon in D filled the air, I felt tears spring to my eyes before I even saw Ava. There's something about weddings that hits you right in the heart, especially when you've lost the person you thought you'd grow old with. For a moment, I was transported back to my own wedding day, remembering how David's hand had trembled slightly when he slipped the ring on my finger, how his voice had cracked when he promised to love me forever. Then, I saw her. Ava appeared at the entrance of the ballroom, and I swear the entire room seemed to glow a little brighter, She was absolutely radiant in her dress, a stunning A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves and a train that seemed to float behind her like she was walking on clouds. Her veil was the one our grandmother had worn, the same one I had worn, passed down through 3 generations of women who had all believed in the power of love. But what made my heart absolutely melt was seeing Uncle Marcus at her side. My father's brother had stepped up after our parents died, walking Ava down the aisle just like Dad would have done. Marcus had been our rock through so many difficult times, and seeing his proud smile as he escorted my sister toward her future brought tears streaming down my cheeks. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Mia whispered, reaching up to touch my face with her small finger. "Happy tears, sweetheart," I whispered back. "Sometimes people cry when they're really, really happy." As Ava walked down the aisle, I watched Mark's face transform completely. This man, who was usually so composed, so put together in his business suits and professional demeanor, was openly weeping as he watched the love of his life approach. His best man handed him a handkerchief, but Mark didn't even seem to notice. His entire world had narrowed down to Ava, and in that moment, I knew beyond any doubt that he truly loved my sister. The officiant, a family friend who had known Ava since she was a teenager, began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the courage it takes to promise your heart to another person. I found myself hanging on every word, remembering my own vows, thinking about the promises David and I had made to each other that were cut short far too soon. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Ava Catherine Morrison and Mark William Richardson in holy matrimony. The officiant announced, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. I squeezed Mia's hand and settled in to watch my sister marry the man of her dreams. This should have been pure joy, pure celebration, nothing but happiness and hope for the future. But that's when I noticed her again. Grandma Evelyn. Something about the way she was sitting caught my attention. While everyone else was focused on the ceremony, their eyes on the bride and groom, Evelyn seemed to be watching everything else. Her gaze kept moving around the room, taking in details, observing the staff, making mental notes about things that had nothing to do with the wedding itself. I watched as she caught the eye of a waiter who was standing near the back of the room. With the slightest nod of her head, she gestured toward our table, and the waiter nodded back before disappearing toward the kitchen. The entire exchange took maybe 3 seconds, so subtle that I almost missed it, but something about it made my stomach clench with unease. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the officiant asked, following the traditional script. "Her family," does Uncle Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion, as he placed Ava's hand in Mark's and stepped back to take his seat. But instead of watching this beautiful moment, I found myself stealing glances at Evelyn. She had pulled out a small notebook from her purse, the kind of leather-bound planner that she always carried, and was making notes with a gold pen. At a wedding ceremony, who takes notes during a wedding ceremony? Mia had noticed too. Kids pick up on things that adults sometimes miss, and my 6-year-old daughter had developed an excellent radar for when something wasn't quite right. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging on my sleeve. "Why is the scary grandma writing things down?" I followed Mia's gaze and saw exactly what she meant. Evelyn wasn't just making casual notes. She was writing deliberately, purposefully, glancing up at specific people, and then writing something down like she was documenting information for some kind of report. "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered back, but a cold feeling was starting to spread through my chest. The ceremony continued with readings about love and partnership, but I was having trouble concentrating. Every few minutes, I'd catch Evelyn making another subtle gesture to the catering staff, or writing something else in her notebook, or staring at Mia and me with an intensity that felt anything but grandmotherly. "Mark, do you take Ava to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer in sickness, and in health, to love and to cherish until death? Do you part?" the officiant asked. "I do," Mark replied, his voice strong and clear despite the tears still flowing down his cheeks. The words hit me harder than I expected. "Until death, do you part?" David and I had spoken those same words, believing we had decades ahead of us, never imagining that death would part us when our daughter was only 3 years old, and we were just beginning to figure out how to be a family. But as emotional as the moment was, I couldn't shake my growing concern about Evelyn's behavior. This wasn't normal grandmother at a wedding conduct. This was something else, entirely something calculated and purposeful, that had absolutely nothing to do with celebrating Ava and Mark's love. Ava, do you take Mark to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health to love and to cherish? Until death do you part. I do, Ava replied, her voice barely audible through her tears of joy. As they exchanged rings, I tried to focus on the beauty of the moment, the promise of new beginnings, the hope that love could conquer anything. But Evelyn chose that exact moment to make another gesture to the catering staff, this time pointing directly at our table before holding up two fingers. Two of something. Two of what Mia had been watching too, and she turned to me with wide eyes that held more understanding than any 6-year-old should have to possess. She's planning something bad, isn't she? Mia whispered, her small voice carrying more intuition than I was comfortable with. I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, that Grandma Evelyn was just being her usual controlling self, that there was nothing to worry about. But the truth was, I was getting worried too. Very worried. By the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride, the officiant announced. The ballroom erupted in cheers and applause as Mark and Ava shared their first kiss as a married couple. It was a perfect moment, the kind of moment that should have filled everyone with joy and hope for the future. But as I clapped and cheered for my sister, I noticed that Evelyn wasn't applauding at all. She was making another note in her book, writing something with particular intensity before snapping it shut and tucking it back into her purse. Then she looked directly at me. Not the casual glance of a fellow wedding guest, but a stare that felt cold and calculating. When our eyes met, she smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile of a grandmother celebrating her family's joy. It was the smile of someone who knew something I didn't. Someone who was holding cards that she hadn't shown yet. I love weddings, Mia said, clapping enthusiastically as Ava and Mark began their recessional walk back down the aisle. But I don't like the way she's looking at us. I followed Mia's gaze back to Evelyn, who was now speaking quietly to the woman sitting next to her, someone I didn't recognize but who kept glancing in our direction as they talked. As the wedding party made their way out of the ceremony space and guests began to stand and stretch, preparing for the cocktail hour before dinner, I made a decision. I needed to know what Evelyn was up to. This wasn't paranoia or the overprotective instincts of a single mother. This was something real, something that had the potential to affect my daughter and me in ways I couldn't yet understand. Come on, sweetheart, I said to Mia, taking her hand as we joined the crowd of guests moving toward the cocktail area. Let's go congratulate Aunt Ava and Uncle Mark. But as we walked, I kept one eye on Evelyn, watching as she made her way toward the catering manager and engaged him in what appeared to be a very serious conversation. Whatever she was planning, it was happening today at this wedding, surrounded by all these people who thought they were just here to celebrate love. The cocktail hour was set up on the venue's gorgeous terrace overlooking the ocean, with the sun beginning to set in the distance. Guests mingled with glasses of champagne and plates of elegant hors d'oeuvres, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine. It should have been magical. Ava and Mark were glowing as they received congratulations from their guests, still holding hands like they couldn't quite believe they were actually married. When we reached them, Ava pulled me into a tight hug that smelled like her perfume and happiness. Oh my God! Olivia, can you believe it? I'm actually married, she laughed, her face radiating pure joy. You looked absolutely beautiful, I told her, meaning every word. And Mark, you clean up pretty well yourself. Mark grinned and pulled me into a hug. Thanks for being here, Olivia. It means everything to both of us. But as we chatted about the ceremony and how perfect everything had been, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Evelyn had approached the catering station and was speaking intently with one of the servers, the same young man she'd gestured to during the ceremony. She was holding what looked like a small card in her hand, pointing to something written on it, and the server was nodding seriously as he listened to her instructions. Aunt Ava, Mia piped up, tugging on my sister's dress. Your wedding was so pretty, but can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Why does Grandma Evelyn keep talking to all the food people? Is she in charge of the dinner? Ava and Mark exchanged a quick glance, and I saw something flicker across Mark's face. Surprise, maybe, or concern? What do you mean, Mia? Ava asked, kneeling down to Mia's level. She keeps pointing at our table and writing things down and talking to the servers. She's been doing it since the wedding started. It's weird. I watched as the color drained slightly from Mark's face. She's been talking to the catering staff. Multiple times, I confirmed, my voice probably carrying more concern than I intended. During the ceremony, after the ceremony, and right now, she seems very focused on giving them specific instructions about something. Mark and Ava exchanged another look, this one definitely tinged with worry. I'm sure it's nothing, Ava said, but her voice had lost some of its celebratory tone. You know how Grandma Evelyn is. She likes to be involved in everything. But Mark was already scanning the crowd, his eyes searching for Evelyn. When he spotted her still deep in conversation with the catering manager, his jaw tightened in a way that told me he was thinking the same thing I was thinking. Something wasn't right. Maybe I should go talk to her, he said quietly. Find out what she's discussing with the staff. Before any of us could respond, a server appeared at our side with a tray of champagne glasses. Champagne for the happy couple and their family, he asked with a professional smile. As we each took a glass, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The server had small pieces of tape on two of the glasses, subtle markings that would be invisible unless you were looking for them. And when he offered the tray, he made sure that Mia and I received those two specific glasses. Actually, I said quickly, could I get a different glass? This one has a smudge on it. The server looked confused for a moment, glancing down at the glass in my hand, which was perfectly clean. Of course, ma'am, let me get you a fresh one. But as he walked away, I noticed him looking back at us with an expression that seemed more concerned than confused. And when I followed his path, I saw him go directly to Evelyn, who was now standing near the edge of the terrace, watching our group with those calculating eyes that had been making me nervous all day. That's when I knew for certain that my instincts had been right. Whatever Evelyn was planning, it involved those marked glasses. It involved the catering staff, and it was specifically targeted at Mia and me. The question was, what was she trying to do, and how far was she willing to go to do it? As the cocktail hour wound down, and guests began making their way back inside for dinner, I tried to push my growing unease to the back of my mind. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe Evelyn was just being her usual controlling self, wanting to make sure every detail of her grandson-in-law's wedding was perfect. Maybe those marked glasses were just a coincidence, or some kind of service protocol I didn't understand. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The reception area had been completely transformed while we were outside. What had been a ceremony space an hour earlier was now an elegant dining room that looked like something out of a fairy tale. Round tables draped in ivory linens were scattered throughout the ballroom, each one topped with towering centerpieces of white roses, eucalyptus, and tiny lights that twinkled like stars. The chandeliers had been dimmed to create a warm, romantic glow, and strings of cafe lights had been hung between the columns, making the entire space feel magical and intimate. Wow, Mia breathed as we walked back inside. It's like a princess castle. She was right. The venue staff had outdone themselves, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and welcoming, sophisticated, yet warm. If I hadn't been so worried about Evelyn's strange behavior, I would have been completely enchanted by the beauty of it all. We found our assigned table easily enough. Table 12, according to the elegant calligraphy on the small card nestled among the flowers. It was positioned perfectly to give us a great view of the head table where Ava and Mark would be sitting close enough to feel included in the celebration, but far enough away that Mia wouldn't get restless during the long dinner service. "Can I sit here, Mommy?" Mia asked, pointing to the chair that would put her back to most of the room, giving her a perfect view of the gardens through the large windows. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, helping her into her seat and adjusting the booster cushion that had been thoughtfully provided. As other guests found their way to our table, I was relieved to discover that we'd been seated with some of Ava's college friends, people I'd met at previous gatherings who were warm, funny, and easy to talk to. There was Jessica, Ava's former roommate, who now worked as a pediatric nurse in San Francisco, and her husband Tom, who taught high school history. Across from them sat Sarah and Mike, another couple who had been part of Ava's close circle since freshman year. "Olivia, it's so good to see you again," Jessica said, giving me a warm hug as she settled into her seat. "And look at this beautiful girl, Mia. You've grown so much since the last time I saw you." Mia beamed at the attention, immediately launching into a detailed description of her new school and her favorite teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who let the class have a pet hamster named Mr. Whiskers. It was exactly the kind of normal, happy conversation that I needed to calm my nerves. As we chatted and caught up on each other's lives, servers began bringing out the first course, a delicate butternut squash soup that smelled absolutely divine. The service was impeccable, with waitstaff moving efficiently between tables, ensuring that everyone's needs were met with quiet professionalism. But I couldn't help noticing that our server, a young woman with short blonde hair and a nervous smile, kept glancing over at table 11, where Evelyn was holding court with several family members I barely knew. Every time the server approached our table, she'd look in Evelyn's direction, as if waiting for some kind of signal or confirmation. "Mommy, I dropped my unicorn," Mia announced suddenly, looking under the table for her favorite toy. A small purple unicorn that she'd insisted on bringing to the wedding, despite my protests that it might get lost. "Where did it go, sweetheart?" I asked, leaning over to help her look. "I think it rolled under the table," she said, already sliding off her chair. "I can get it." Before I could stop her, Mia had disappeared under the tablecloth, crawling around on her hands and knees in search of her beloved toy. I could hear her moving around under there, the rustling of fabric and her little voice talking to herself as she searched. "Kids," Jessica laughed. "They can find adventure anywhere." "Tell me about it," I replied, but I was keeping one ear tuned to Mia's movements under the table. "Mia, did you find it?" "Almost," came her muffled reply. "There's a lot of stuff under here." The conversation at our table continued around me, but I was starting to feel that familiar maternal anxiety that kicks in whenever your child is out of sight, even for just a few minutes. Something about this whole evening had me on edge, and every instinct I had was telling me to keep Mia close. "Found it," Mia announced triumphantly from beneath the table. But instead of immediately crawling back out, she went quiet for a moment. Then I heard her voice, smaller and more uncertain. "Mommy, there's something else down here." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "There's a piece of paper. It was taped under the table, but it came loose." My blood turned to ice. A piece of paper taped under our table. That wasn't normal. That wasn't an accident or coincidence. That was deliberate. "Bring it up here, Mia," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was starting to race. The tablecloth rustled as Mia crawled back toward her chair, and then her little head popped up, her hair slightly mussed from her adventure under the table. In one hand, she held her purple unicorn, and in the other was a small piece of white paper folded twice. "Here, Mommy," she said, handing me the paper with the innocent trust of a child who doesn't yet understand that sometimes adults hide dangerous secrets in the most unexpected places. My hands were shaking slightly as I unfolded the note, and what I saw there made my stomach drop like I was falling off a cliff. In neat, precise handwriting I recognized as Evelyn's, were the words, "Table 12, extra shellfish, no allergy needed. E." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't process what I was reading because it was so far beyond anything I could have imagined, so much worse than my worst fears about Evelyn's strange behavior. Shellfish. Extra shellfish. Mia is severely allergic to shellfish. Not just a little sensitive, not just something that might give her a stomachache. She carries an EpiPen everywhere we go because even trace amounts of shellfish can send her into anaphylactic shock, can close her throat, and stop her breathing and kill her within minutes if she doesn't get immediate medical attention. And this note, this deliberate instruction hidden under our table, was telling someone to put extra shellfish in our food, with a note that said, "No allergy needed," as if the person writing it knew full well that there was already a severe allergy to consider, but that they should ignore it. "Mommy," Mia's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You look scary. What does the paper say?" I looked down at my daughter, this beautiful, innocent little girl who trusted me to keep her safe, who had no idea that someone in our own family was apparently willing to put her life at risk for reasons I couldn't even begin to understand. Honey," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as I tried to keep the other guests at our table from overhearing. "Why did you look under the table? What made you think to check there?" Mia's eyes were wide and serious as she climbed back into her chair. "Because the paper told me to check," she said simply. "What paper? What do you mean?" "There was another paper," she explained, reaching into the small purse she'd insisted on carrying. "A lady gave it to me when we were getting our seats. She said it was a special treasure hunt just for me." With growing horror, I watched as Mia pulled out another folded piece of paper, this one slightly larger than the first. When I opened it, I found a child-friendly note written in colorful markers. "Hi, Mia. There's a special surprise waiting under your dinner table. Can you find it? Love, a friend?" Someone had deliberately sent my 6-year-old daughter on a treasure hunt to find evidence of their own plot against her. Someone had used her innocent curiosity and trust to expose their own criminal intentions. Someone had been so confident in their plan that they'd turned it into a game. "Who gave this to you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even though I felt like I might throw up. "A nice lady with gray hair," Mia said. "She was wearing a red dress and pretty earrings. She said she knew my daddy." "Evelyn." Of course it was Evelyn. But why would she want Mia to find the note? Why would she expose her own plan unless she wanted me to find it? Unless this was all part of something bigger, something more calculated than just trying to hurt Mia? Unless the real target wasn't my daughter at all, but me? "Honey, listen to me very carefully," I said, taking Mia's hands in mine. "We need to be very careful about what we eat tonight, okay? And if anyone offers you anything, any food, any drinks, anything at all, you tell them no and you come get me immediately." "Do you understand?" Mia nodded solemnly, picking up on the seriousness in my voice, even if she didn't understand the full implications of what we discovered. "Are we in danger, Mommy?" she asked quietly. Before I could answer, our server appeared at the table again this time, carrying plates for the second course. As she set a beautiful piece of pan-seared salmon in front of each guest, I noticed that she lingered an extra moment at Mia's place setting, adjusting the plate just so, making sure it was positioned perfectly. "Enjoy your dinner," she said with that same nervous smile, but this time when she glanced toward Evelyn's table, I was watching for it. And I saw Evelyn give the slightest nod, the kind of subtle acknowledgement that confirmed my worst fears. The plan was in motion. The food had been tampered with. And the only thing standing between my daughter and a potentially fatal allergic reaction was the fact that she'd accidentally uncovered the plot herself. "We're not going to eat this," I whispered to Mia, pushing both our plates away from us. "But I'm hungry," she protested. "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to get something else. Something safe." As I sat there staring at the innocent-looking piece of salmon that could have killed my daughter, one thought kept running through my mind. How far was Evelyn willing to go? And what was she really after? Because this wasn't just about custody, or control, or even hatred. This was attempted murder planned and premeditated, carried out at a family wedding in front of dozens of witnesses. This was the action of someone who was either completely unhinged or absolutely desperate. And the scariest part, the note had said, "No allergy needed," which meant Evelyn knew about Mia's condition. She knew how dangerous shellfish was for my daughter, and she'd specifically instructed someone to add it to our food anyway. She wasn't just trying to make Mia sick, she was trying to kill her. The question was, why? What could possibly drive a grandmother to try to murder her own granddaughter? What was so important to Evelyn that she was willing to commit the ultimate crime to get it? As I looked across the room at the woman who had given birth to my late husband, who had held Mia as a baby, who had sat at our dinner table and pretended to care about our family, I realized that I was looking at a complete stranger. Someone capable of things I had never imagined, someone whose depths of cruelty and calculation were beyond anything I had prepared myself to face. And the most terrifying part of all, the evening was far from over. If this was just the beginning of Evelyn's plan, what else was she prepared to do before the night was through? I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at those two pieces of evidence that proved someone was trying to hurt my daughter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers, and my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone at the table could hear it. "Olivia, are you okay?" Jessica asked, her nurse's instincts clearly picking up on my distress. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied quickly, folding the notes and tucking them into my purse. "Just feeling a little overwhelmed. It's been an emotional day." But I wasn't fine. I was the furthest thing from fine. Someone had just tried to poison my child, and that someone was sitting 30 feet away from me, calmly eating her dinner, and making polite conversation, like she hadn't just orchestrated what could have been my daughter's death. I needed to confront Evelyn. I needed answers. But I also needed to be smart about this. If she was willing to go this far, if she was truly capable of attempted murder, then I had to assume she had more tricks up her sleeve. I couldn't just march over there and accuse her in front of the entire wedding reception. I needed to get her alone, away from witnesses, where she might actually tell me the truth. "Mia, sweetheart," I said, turning to my daughter, who was still clutching her purple unicorn and looking confused about why we weren't eating our food. "I need you to stay right here with Jessica and Tom, okay? Don't eat anything. Don't drink anything. Just sit here and tell them about Mr. Whiskers. Can you do that for me?" Mia nodded seriously. She might not understand everything that was happening, but she understood that something was wrong and that she needed to listen to Mommy very carefully. "Where are you going?" Jessica asked, clearly concerned by my strange behavior. "I just need to have a quick conversation with someone," I said, standing up from the table. "I'll be right back. Please, just keep an eye on Mia for me." I made my way across the ballroom, weaving between tables of laughing, chatting guests who had no idea that a potential crime scene was unfolding right in their midst. Everyone looked so happy, so carefree, so completely unaware that someone among them was capable of the unthinkable. Evelyn was exactly where I expected her to be, holding court at her table, like the matriarch she'd always seen herself as. She was deep in conversation with David's cousin Patricia, gesturing elegantly with her hands as she told what appeared to be a very entertaining story. She looked absolutely normal, completely composed, like someone who spent her evenings planning attempted murders and then casually attending wedding receptions. "Evelyn," I said, approaching her table with what I hoped was a calm, controlled voice. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" She looked up at me with those cold gray eyes, and for just a split second, I could have sworn I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, guilt, or was it satisfaction? "Of course, dear," she said, smoothly dabbing at her lips with her napkin before standing up. "Ladies, if you'll excuse me for just a moment." We walked toward the hallway that led to the restrooms, away from the main reception area, but still within sight of the other guests. I needed witnesses nearby, but I also needed enough privacy to have the conversation that could change everything. Once we were alone in the marble-lined corridor, I turned to face the woman who had raised my husband, who had been part of my family for nearly a decade, who I was now certain had just tried to kill my child. "I found something interesting tonight," I said, pulling the folded notes from my purse and holding them up where she could see them. Evelyn's expression didn't change at all. She looked at the papers with the same mild curiosity she might show when examining a restaurant menu. "What are those, dear?" she asked, her voice carrying that same condescending tone she'd always used with me. "You know exactly what they are," I said, unfolding the first note and reading it aloud. "Table 12. Extra shellfish. No allergy needed. E." For just a moment the mask slipped. I saw something dark and calculating flash across Evelyn's face before she quickly composed herself again. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but there was a defensiveness in her voice that hadn't been there before. "This note was taped under our dinner table." I continued, my voice getting stronger as my anger began to override my fear. "And this one," I held up the second paper, "was given to my 6-year-old daughter by a woman matching your exact description, sending her on a treasure hunt to find the first note." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like she was trying to decide how to play this. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, still controlled, but with an edge of something that might have been annoyance. "Olivia, I think you're letting your imagination run away with you," she said. "You've always been prone to dramatics. It's one of the things that concerned me about your suitability as a mother." The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow, but it also confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about a long-term campaign to undermine me, to prove that I was unfit to raise Mia, to justify whatever she was really planning. "My daughter could have died," I said, my voice barely controlled. "If she had eaten that food, if we hadn't found that note, she could have gone into anaphylactic shock and died. You know about her shellfish allergy. You've known about it since she was 2 years old." "Of course I know about it," Evelyn said, and something in her tone made my blood run cold. "I'm her grandmother. I know everything about that child." The way she said "that child" instead of "my granddaughter" sent chills down my spine. There was no warmth there, no familial affection, just cold calculation. "Then you know how dangerous this was," I pressed. "You know that what you did tonight wasn't just cruel, it was attempted murder." Evelyn laughed, actually laughed like I had just told her the most ridiculous joke she'd ever heard. "Murder. Oh, Olivia, you really are as dramatic as I always said. It was just a little mix-up in the kitchen. These things happen at large events. I was simply trying to ensure that you and Mia received extra attention from the catering staff. I was worried about your health, making sure you got the nutrition you need." But even as she said it, I could see that she didn't expect me to believe her. This wasn't a real denial. It was just going through the motions, testing to see how much I actually knew. "You're lying," I said flatly. "And we both know it. The question is why. What could you possibly hope to gain by hurting Mia?" For the first time since we'd started talking, Evelyn's carefully controlled facade began to crack. Her eyes narrowed, and when she spoke, her voice carried a venom that she'd never let me hear before. "That child," she said, "represents a very expensive problem that needs to be solved." The coldness in her voice, the way she reduced my daughter to a financial calculation, made me feel sick. But it also gave me the first real clue about what this was actually about. "What do you mean?" I asked. Before Evelyn could answer, I heard footsteps behind us. Uncle Marcus was walking down the hallway looking like he was headed to the restroom, but moving slowly, like he wasn't sure he wanted to interrupt whatever conversation he'd stumbled upon. "Marcus," I called out, making a split-second decision. "Actually, could you join us for a moment? I think you need to hear this." Marcus looked between Evelyn and me, clearly sensing the tension in the air. "Is everything all right?" "That depends," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Evelyn. "Marcus, did you know that Evelyn has been coordinating with the catering staff to put shellfish in Mia's food tonight?" The color drained from Marcus's face. As David's brother, he knew all about Mia's allergy. He'd been there when we'd rushed her to the emergency room that terrifying day when she was 3 and accidentally ate a shrimp at a restaurant. He knew how serious this was. Evelyn, he said, his voice careful but concerned. Is that true? Evelyn shot me a look that could have melted steel, furious that I'd brought Marcus into this conversation. But she was trapped now, caught between her lies and the truth with a witness who couldn't be dismissed or manipulated. It's not what it sounds like, she said, but I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. Marcus stepped closer, and I could see that his hands were shaking slightly. Evelyn, Mia could die from shellfish exposure. You know that. We all know that. If Olivia found evidence that you were trying to expose her to shellfish, then... He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. But we all knew what he was thinking. Then this was attempted murder. You don't understand the full situation, Evelyn said, her voice getting more agitated. There are factors at play here that neither of you comprehend, financial realities that need to be addressed. What financial realities? Marcus asked, and I could see confusion mixing with growing alarm on his face. Evelyn looked back and forth between us, like she was weighing her options, trying to decide how much truth she was willing to reveal. When she finally spoke, her words chilled me to the bone. David's life insurance policy, she said quietly. It's worth $2 million with Mia as the beneficiary and Olivia as the trustee until Mia turns 18. But if something were to happen to Olivia, if she were to become incapacitated or unavailable, then the next guardian would gain control of those funds. The world seemed to stop spinning. I felt like I was falling down a very deep, very dark hole. And who is the next guardian? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. I am, Evelyn said, lifting her chin with something that might have been pride. I'm listed as the secondary guardian in David's will. If you're unable to care for Mia, then custody reverts to me. Marcus was staring at Evelyn like he'd never seen her before in his life. You're talking about deliberately harming a child to get money. I'm talking about ensuring that child has the best possible future, Evelyn snapped. Olivia can barely afford to keep them fed and housed. I can provide Mia with private schools, college tuition opportunities that she'll never have living in that tiny apartment with a mother who works from home, making barely above minimum wage. By killing her mother, Marcus's voice was getting louder, and I could see other wedding guests starting to glance in our direction. Nobody said anything about killing anyone, Evelyn hissed. If Olivia were to have an accident tonight, if she were to require extended hospitalization due to food poisoning, well, that might demonstrate that she's not capable of properly protecting her daughter. A judge might decide that a more stable guardian would be in Mia's best interests. The pieces were falling into place now, and the picture they created was even more horrifying than I had imagined. This wasn't just about the money, though that was clearly a major factor. This was about taking my daughter away from me completely, using my own potential death or incapacitation as proof that I was an unfit mother. You're insane, I whispered. I'm practical, Evelyn corrected. And everything I'm doing is for that child's own good. She deserves better than what you can give her. Marcus was looking between us with an expression of complete horror. Evelyn, this is criminal. You can't seriously be considering... I'm not considering anything, she said sharply. I'm simply pointing out the realities of the situation. If Olivia were to become unable to care for Mia, then I would step in to provide the stability and resources that child needs. But even as she said it, I could see the guilt and desperation in her eyes. This wasn't just about money or custody. This was about a woman who had lost her son and was willing to do anything hurt anyone to maintain some kind of control over the family he'd left behind. The question was, how far was she willing to go? And what was she planning to do now that her initial plan had been exposed? As I stood there in that marble hallway, listening to my mother-in-law calmly discuss my potential death, like it was a business transaction, I realized that this was far from over. If anything, confronting her had only made things more dangerous. Because now she knew that I knew. And a desperate person with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person of all. The tension in that hallway was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Marcus was staring at Evelyn like he'd never seen her before, and I was trying to process the fact that my mother-in-law had just casually admitted to planning what could have been my death for financial gain. "We need to talk about this somewhere private," Marcus said quietly, glancing around at the wedding guests who were starting to notice our heated conversation. People are beginning to stare. He was right. Several guests had turned in our direction, and I could see whispered conversations starting at the nearby tables. The last thing Ava needed on her wedding day was a family scandal playing out in front of all her friends and relatives. "There's a small meeting room down this hallway," Evelyn said, her voice returning to that controlled, aristocratic tone she used when she wanted to maintain the appearance of being in charge. "We can discuss this matter there." As we walked toward the private room, my mind was racing. I needed to get back to Mia, needed to make sure she was safe. But I also knew that this conversation was far from over. If Evelyn was truly capable of what she'd just described, then I needed to understand the full scope of her plan before I could figure out how to protect my daughter. The meeting room was small and elegantly appointed, with a mahogany conference table surrounded by leather chairs and oil paintings of seascapes on the walls. As soon as Marcus closed the door behind us, the veneer of civility that Evelyn had been maintaining completely disappeared. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she said, whirling around to face me with fury blazing in her eyes. "You think this is just about money. You think I'm some kind of monster who would hurt a child for personal gain. Aren't you?" I shot back my own anger, finally breaking through the shock and fear I'd been feeling. "You just admitted to trying to poison my daughter to get control of her inheritance." "I admitted to nothing of the sort," Evelyn snapped. "I was simply explaining the legal realities of the situation. If you're unable to care for Mia properly, then yes, custody would revert to me. That's not a threat. That's just a fact." Marcus stepped between us, his face pale, but his voice steady. "Evelyn, stop. Just stop the games and tell us what's really going on here. Why are you so desperate to get control of David's life insurance money?" For a moment, Evelyn looked like she was going to maintain her denials. But then something seemed to break inside her and she sank into one of the leather chairs like all the fight had gone out of her. "It's not for me," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The money isn't for me." "Then who is it for?" I asked, sitting down across from her. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes that I had never seen before. "It's for Ava," she said, "and Mark." I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. "What are you talking about? Mark is in serious financial trouble," Evelyn continued, her voice getting stronger as she started to explain. "He owes money to some very dangerous people, the kind of people who don't just sue you when you can't pay, they hurt you and the people you love." Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. "How do you know this?" "Because he came to me 3 months ago begging for help," Evelyn said. "He told me about the gambling debts, about the threats, about how he was terrified that something might happen to Ava if he couldn't come up with the money." The room was spinning. This couldn't be true. Mark was successful, stable, the kind of man who had his life together. He couldn't possibly be involved in something this dark and dangerous. "How much money are we talking about?" Marcus asked. $800,000, Evelyn replied. "That's what he owes, and the people he owes it to have made it very clear that they expect payment soon, or there will be consequences." I thought about Mark's behavior during the wedding ceremony, the way he'd seemed nervous and distracted at times. I'd attributed it to normal wedding jitters, but now I was wondering if there had been something else going on. "So, you decided to solve his problem by stealing my daughter's inheritance?" I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. "I decided to solve his problem by ensuring that Mia would have a proper guardian who could provide for her needs," Evelyn corrected. "The insurance money would go toward Mia's care, of course. Her education, her living expenses, everything she needs. But if there happened to be enough left over to help Mark get out of his current situation, well, that would benefit the whole family. By putting me in the hospital or worse," I said flatly. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "The plan wasn't to seriously harm you. It was to make you sick enough to require medical attention, sick enough to demonstrate that you're not capable of protecting Mia from dangerous situations. Food allergies don't work that way, I said, my voice rising. You can't control how severe an allergic reaction will be. You could have killed me. The risk was minimal, Evelyn insisted, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. Marcus was pacing back and forth behind his chair, running his hands through his hair. This is insane, Evelyn. Even if Mark is in trouble, even if he needs money, you can't just decide to steal from a child and potentially kill her mother in the process. I wasn't going to let anything happen to Olivia, Evelyn said, but even she didn't sound convinced by her own words anymore. How? I demanded. How were you going to control what happened to me once I started going into anaphylactic shock? Were you planning to happen to have my EpiPen ready? Were you going to conveniently know exactly what medical treatment I needed? Evelyn was quiet for a moment, and in that silence I realized that she hadn't thought this through nearly as carefully as she'd claimed. She'd been so focused on the end goal, getting control of the money, that she hadn't fully considered the real-world consequences of her actions. I had the catering manager standing by with medical supplies, she said finally. If anything went wrong, he was prepared to help. The catering manager, Marcus exploded. You mean some random guy who works for the venue? He's not a doctor, Evelyn. He's not qualified to handle a medical emergency. Before Evelyn could respond, Marcus turned to me with an expression that was equal parts anger and shame. Olivia, there's something else you need to know, he said quietly. Something I've been investigating for the past few weeks. What do you mean? I asked. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I hired a private investigator to look into Mark's background before the wedding. I had some concerns about how quickly things were moving between him and Ava, and I wanted to make sure he was everything he claimed to be. My heart sank. What did you find? Mark did approach Evelyn for money just like she said. But he didn't tell her the whole truth about why he needed it. Marcus unfolded the paper and set it on the table between us. The gambling debts are real, but they're not the only problem. Mark has been embezzling money from his company for the past 2 years to cover his losses. His boss is getting suspicious, and if he gets caught, he's looking at serious jail time. Evelyn went completely white. He told me it was just gambling debts. He said it was a temporary problem that could be solved with money. It's much bigger than that, Marcus continued. And here's the worst part. He knows about David's life insurance policy. He's known about it since he started dating Ava. He specifically asked her about it 6 months ago, claiming he wanted to make sure that Mia would be financially secure if anything happened to you. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that was even more horrifying than what I'd imagined. Mark hadn't just stumbled into financial trouble and then sought help from Evelyn. He deliberately targeted my family, pursued my sister, and manipulated Evelyn into believing that she was helping solve a simple problem when she was actually becoming an accessory to a much larger crime. He played you, I said to Evelyn, watching as the realization dawned on her face. He knew you'd do anything to protect the family, so he made you think that hurting me was the only way to save Ava. No, Evelyn whispered, shaking her head. No, he wouldn't. He loves Ava. I can see it. He genuinely loves her. He might love her, Marcus said grimly, but he loves money more, and he's willing to destroy anyone who stands between him and what he wants. Suddenly the door burst open and Ava rushed into the room. Her face was flushed. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, and there were tears streaming down her cheeks. I heard voices, she said, looking around at all of us. People were saying there was some kind of argument, and when I couldn't find any of you, she trailed off, taking in our expressions. What's going on? Why does everyone look like someone died? The silence that followed was deafening. None of us knew how to begin explaining what we'd just discovered, how to tell a bride on her wedding day that her new husband had manipulated everyone in her family and put her niece's life at risk for money. Ava, I said, finally standing up from my chair. Sit down, sweetheart. We need to tell you something. No, Ava said, backing toward the door. No, I can see it in your faces. Whatever this is about, I don't want to hear it. Not today, not on my wedding day. Ava, please, Marcus said gently. You need to know what Mark has been doing. At the mention of her husband's name, Ava's face went completely pale. What about Mark? What has he been doing? I looked at Marcus and Evelyn, realizing that the burden of explaining this was going to fall on me. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out the notes that had started this entire nightmare. Mark is in serious financial trouble, I said as gently as I could. He owes a lot of money to dangerous people, and he's been embezzling from his company to try to cover his debts. Ava shook her head frantically. That's not true. Mark is successful. He has a good job. He makes good money. He wouldn't... He approached Evelyn 3 months ago, I continued. He told her about the debts and asked for help. But instead of just asking for a loan, he convinced her that the only way to get enough money was to gain control of David's life insurance policy. What does David's insurance have to do with anything? Ava asked, but I could see understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. Evelyn tried to make me sick tonight, I said quietly. She had the catering staff put shellfish in my food knowing that I'm allergic. If I had eaten it, if I had ended up in the hospital or worse, she would have become Mia's guardian and gained control of the insurance money. Ava was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. That's impossible. Evelyn would never... She loves Mia. She loves all of us. I was trying to protect this family, Evelyn said, her voice barely audible. Mark said that if he couldn't pay these people, they might hurt you, Ava. I couldn't let that happen. So you decided to hurt my sister instead. Ava's voice was getting louder, angrier. You decided to risk killing the mother of your own granddaughter. I wasn't going to let anything happen to Olivia, Evelyn insisted, but even she seemed to realize how hollow those words sounded now. Ava turned to look at each of us in turn, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't even name. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a pain that broke my heart. You're telling me that the man I just married, the man I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with, manipulated all of you into putting my niece in danger so he could steal money from a child. Ava, Marcus said softly, I'm so sorry. I should have told you what I'd discovered before the wedding. But I was hoping I was wrong. I was hoping there was some other explanation. And you, Ava said, whirling around to face Evelyn, you were willing to risk murdering my sister because a man you barely know told you it was necessary. Evelyn tried to speak, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked completely defeated, like all the fight had gone out of her. You betrayed me, Ava continued, her voice breaking. Both of you betrayed me. You betrayed Olivia and Mia. You betrayed everything our family is supposed to stand for. And with that, Evelyn finally broke down completely. The composed, controlled woman, who had terrorized me for years, collapsed into her chair, sobbing like a child. I was trying to protect you, she said through her tears. I was trying to protect all of us. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing? Ava said incredulously. The right thing would have been to tell me that my fiancé was in trouble. The right thing would have been to let me decide whether I wanted to marry someone with that kind of baggage. The right thing would have been to trust me to handle my own life. As I watched my sister confront the wreckage of what should have been the happiest day of her life, I realized that Evelyn's plan had destroyed more than just my sense of security. It had shattered our entire family, exposing lies and betrayals that would take years to heal from, if they ever healed at all. And somewhere out in that ballroom, Mark was probably still playing the role of the happy groom, completely unaware that his entire scheme had just fallen apart. What happened next was like watching a slow-motion car crash that you can't stop but can't look away from either. We all sat there in that small conference room for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to process the enormity of what had just been revealed. Ava was crying. Evelyn was crying. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick, and I was just trying to figure out how I was going to explain to my 6-year-old daughter that we needed to leave her aunt's wedding immediately and possibly never see her grandmother again. I need to find Mark, Ava said, finally wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself. I need to hear this from him. I need to know if any of what you're telling me is actually true. Ava, wait, I said, standing up as she headed toward the door. You can't just confront him in front of all the wedding guests. Think about what that would do to everyone here. But she was already gone, the door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the paintings on the walls. Marcus and I looked at each other, and I could see my own thoughts reflected in his eyes. This was about to get very ugly, very quickly, and there were over 100 innocent people in that ballroom who had no idea they were about to witness the complete destruction of what had started as a fairy tale wedding. I have to get Mia, I said, grabbing my purse and the evidence that had started this entire nightmare. She doesn't need to see whatever is about to happen out there. Olivia, wait, Evelyn said, reaching out to grab my arm as I passed her chair. Please. I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can work something out. You don't have to. I pulled my arm away from her grip, looking down at this woman, who had raised my husband, who had been part of my life for nearly a decade, who I was now seeing clearly for the first time. You tried to kill me, I said quietly. You used my daughter as bait in your plan to potentially murder her mother. There is no working something out. There is no fixing this. There is only making sure that you never get the chance to hurt either of us again. I left her sitting there and hurried back toward the reception, my heart pounding as I tried to prepare myself for whatever chaos was about to unfold. But even my worst fears didn't come close to the reality of what I found when I reached the ballroom. Ava had found Mark at the head table where he'd been chatting with his best man and seemingly having the time of his life. But by the time I arrived, their conversation had clearly moved far beyond pleasantries. Even from across the room, I could see that Mark's face had gone completely white, and Ava was standing over him with her hands on her hips, speaking in a voice that was low but carried enough anger to cut through glass. The guests at the nearby tables had stopped their conversations and were staring openly now, clearly sensing that something serious was happening, but not understanding what. The band was still playing, but even they seemed to sense the shift in energy and were starting to slow down their tempo. I made my way quickly to our table where Mia was still sitting with Jessica and Tom, looking confused but not yet frightened. "Mommy," she said when she saw me approaching. "You were gone for a really long time. Jessica was telling me about the baby horses at her farm." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile as I helped her down from her chair. "But we need to go now." "Go where?" Mia asked. "The party isn't over yet. They haven't even cut the cake." Jessica looked up at me with concern. "Olivia, is everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before I could answer, we all heard Ava's voice rise above the background noise of the reception. "Don't you dare lie to me, Mark. Not now, not after everything that's happened." The entire ballroom seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence forks, paused halfway to mouths, and even the band finally stopped playing altogether. In the sudden silence, every word of what was happening at the head table became audible to everyone in the room. "Ava, please," Mark was saying, his voice carrying that desperate tone of someone who knows they've been caught. "Can we please discuss this privately? People are staring." "Let them stare," Ava shot back. "Let them all hear about how you manipulated my family into putting my niece's life at risk, so you could steal money from a 6-year-old. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. I could see people pulling out their phones, some probably to record what was happening, others to call family members and share the gossip that was unfolding before their eyes. "Mommy," Mia whispered, tugging on my dress. "Why is Aunt Ava yelling at Uncle Mark?" "Because sometimes adults make very bad choices," I said, picking her up, even though she was getting too big to carry easily. "And when they do, there are consequences." By now, Mark had stood up from the head table and was trying to guide Ava away from the crowd, but she wasn't having any of it. She shrugged off his hands and stepped back, creating even more distance between them. "You want to know what my husband has been doing?" Ava announced to the entire room, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. He's been embezzling money from his company to cover gambling debts, and when that wasn't enough, he convinced my late brother-in-law's mother to try to poison my sister so she could steal my niece's inheritance. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Guests started talking all at once, some standing up from their tables to get a better view, others grabbing their purses and looking for the exits. Several people were openly recording now, their phones held high to capture every moment of the drama. "Ava, stop," Mark said, his voice getting louder as he tried to regain control of the situation. "You don't know what you're talking about. Someone has filled your head with lies." "Lies?" Ava laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean like the lie that you love me? Or the lie that you want to build a life together? Or maybe the lie that you're not a criminal who was willing to let a child die for money?" That's when Mark's composure finally cracked completely. Instead of the charming, composed man who had been exchanging vows just hours earlier, I saw someone desperate and cornered, someone who was realizing that everything he'd worked for was slipping away. "You think you're so perfect," he snarled at Ava. "You think your precious family is so much better than everyone else. Your brother-in-law left his wife and child with nothing but debt and false promises. At least, I was trying to solve the problem." The cruelty in his voice, the way he spoke about David and our family, made my blood boil. But it also confirmed everything that Marcus and I had suspected. This wasn't a man who had made a mistake or gotten in over his head. This was someone who genuinely believed that other people existed solely for his benefit. "Get out," Ava said quietly, but her voice carried across the entire ballroom. "Get out of here before I call the police and have you arrested for conspiracy to commit murder." "You can't prove anything," Mark said, but he was already backing away from her, looking around the room at all the faces staring at him with disgust and horror. "Can't I?" Ava reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Because I've been recording this entire conversation, and I'm pretty sure there are about 50 other phones in this room that caught your confession too." That's when Mark realized that his situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. Not only had his plan failed, but he'd just admitted his guilt in front of dozens of witnesses, many of whom were recording everything. He looked around the room one more time, his eyes wild with panic, before bolting toward the nearest exit. Several of the male guests started to follow him, but Uncle Marcus held up his hand. "Let him go," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The police can deal with him now." As Mark disappeared through the exit, the ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests were talking excitedly among themselves, trying to piece together what they'd just witnessed. Some were already on their phones, presumably calling family members to share the shocking turn of events. Others were gathering their belongings, clearly wanting to leave before things got any worse. "Ladies and gentlemen," Uncle Marcus announced, stepping up to the microphone that had been set up for the evening's toast. "I think it's best if we end the celebration here. Thank you all for coming, and please remember that families sometimes go through difficult times. We ask for your privacy and understanding as we work through this situation." It was a graceful attempt to bring some dignity to an impossible situation, but the damage was already done. Ava and Mark's wedding would be remembered not for its beauty or romance, but for the spectacular way it had imploded in front of everyone they cared about. As guests began filing out of the ballroom, I carried Mia toward the exit, trying to shield her from the worst of the chaos. She was too young to understand most of what had happened, but she knew enough to be scared. "Are we in trouble, Mommy?" she asked quietly. "No, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "We're not in trouble, but we do need to go home now." That's when I saw Evelyn standing near the entrance, looking lost and broken. When she spotted Mia and me, she started walking in our direction, but I quickly changed course, heading for a different exit. I couldn't deal with another confrontation, couldn't risk her trying to manipulate the situation or make excuses for what she'd done. I had to protect my daughter, and that meant getting as far away from all of this as possible. 3 months later, Mia and I were living in a small coastal town about 200 miles north of where our old life had imploded. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was peaceful, and after everything we'd been through, peace was exactly what we needed. I'd managed to expand my freelance graphic design work into a small but steady online business, working with clients all over the country who needed logos, websites, and marketing materials. It wasn't making us rich, but it was enough to cover our expenses in our tiny rental house 3 blocks from the beach. Mia had adapted to our new life with the resilience that children seem to possess naturally. She'd made friends at her new school, joined the local library's reading club, and spent most afternoons playing on the beach or exploring the tide pools with the neighborhood kids. The legal aftermath of that terrible wedding night had been complicated, but ultimately satisfying. Mark had been arrested and charged with embezzlement and conspiracy. Evelyn had avoided criminal charges by cooperating with the investigation, but I'd obtained a restraining order that prevented her from contacting Mia or me without court supervision. Ava had filed for an annulment, immediately claiming fraud, and had moved back in with Uncle Marcus while she figured out what to do next. We talked on the phone every few weeks, both of us still processing the trauma of that night, but our relationship was slowly healing. On this particular evening, Mia and I were sitting on the small deck behind our rental house, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. She was working on a puzzle while I answered emails, and the only sounds were the waves crashing against the shore and the occasional cry of a seagull. "Mommy," Mia said, suddenly looking up from her puzzle. "Do you think we'll ever visit Grandma Evelyn again?" It was a question I'd been dreading, but knew would come eventually. Mia was too young to understand the full scope of what Evelyn had done, but she was old enough to notice that someone who used to be part of our lives had suddenly disappeared. I set down my laptop and looked at my daughter, this amazing little person who had survived more trauma in her short life than many adults ever face. She deserved an honest answer, but one that wouldn't give her nightmares. "I don't think so, sweetheart," I said softly. "Grandma Evelyn made some very bad choices that hurt our family. Sometimes when people hurt us that badly, the best thing we can do is stay away from them so they can't hurt us again." Mia nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness that she brought to all important topics. "Are you sad about it?" she asked. I thought about that question for a moment. Was I sad? There had definitely been grief involved in accepting that someone I'd considered family for nearly a decade was capable of such cruelty. But alongside that, grief was relief, freedom, and hope for the future. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But mostly, I'm grateful that we're safe now. That's what matters most." Mia smiled at that, returning to her puzzle with the contentment of a child who trusts that the adults in her life will keep her safe. As I watched her work surrounded by the peaceful sounds of our new home, I realized that despite everything we'd lost, we'd also gained something precious. We'd gained our freedom. Freedom from manipulation, from fear, from walking on eggshells around people who claim to love us, but were willing to hurt us for their own gain. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and I pulled Mia onto my lap to watch the last of the light fade over the water. "I love our new house," she said, snuggling against me. "Me too, baby," I replied, kissing the top of her head. "Me too." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I made a silent promise to my daughter and to myself. We would never again allow toxic people to have power over our lives. We would trust our instincts, set boundaries, and choose peace over drama every single time. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. And sometimes, the greatest victory is simply being brave enough to save yourself. The waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore, washing away the day's worries, and reminding us that tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new hopes, and new chances to choose happiness over fear. We were safe now, and that, as I'd told my daughter, was what mattered most. Sometimes, the people who claim to love us the most are the ones willing to hurt us the deepest. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect yourself or your children? Share your story in the comments below. And if you want to hear more real-life family drama stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.